The Enlightenment didn't reject God first. It rejected Thomas Aquinas' idea of reason. In our last video, we explored Aquinas' 5 ways and how both atheists and believers misunderstand what he actually proved. Today, we're going to see what happened when philosophy turned against him, and why that rejection still shapes every conversation about God we have today. By the end of this video, you'll understand why modern philosophy turned against Aquinas, and why that rejection still defines how we talk about God, reason, and knowledge today. You'll see how Enlightenment thinkers didn't refute Aquinas. They changed the rules. And in doing so, they created a problem we still haven't solved. This isn't about defending religion. It's about understanding what we lost when we stopped asking Aquinas questions. Most people believe the Enlightenment was a victory of reason over superstition. Science defeated dogma. Evidence replaced faith. Progress triumphed over medieval darkness. That's the story we tell ourselves. And it's not entirely wrong. But it's dangerously incomplete. Because the Enlightenment didn't just challenge religious authority, it redefined what counts as knowledge itself. And in doing so, it didn't refute medieval philosophy. It declared it irrelevant. Here's the problem. When you tell the story as reason versus faith, you miss what actually happened. The medieval philosophers, especially Aquinas, weren't anti-reason. They were obsessed with reason. They built entire systems of logic, metaphysics, and natural philosophy. The Enlightenment didn't introduce reason. It introduced a new standard for what reason could claim to know. And under that new standard, Aquinas' arguments didn't fail, they became unaskable. That's not the same thing. But we've been dealing with this the same way for 300 years. And that confusion is the enemy we're dealing with here.
So let's briefly revisit what Aquinas actually argued. He believed reason had limits, but within those limits it was powerful. Reason could demonstrate that God exists, not who God is, not God's inner nature, not the Trinity, but that there must be a necessary being, an unmoved mover, a ground of existence. Aquinas wasn't doing science. He was doing metaphysics. He was asking questions like, why is there something rather than nothing? What grounds the intelligibility of nature? What makes causation possible? These aren't empirical questions. You can't test them in a lab. You can't observe them through a telescope. They're questions about the structure of reality itself. For Aquinas, God wasn't a hypothesis. God was pure actuality, the ontological foundation that makes everything else possible. That's the position. And the Enlightenment didn't argue against it directly. They did something more radical. They asked, should we even be asking these questions? The Enlightenment didn't ask, is Aquinas right? It asked, what counts as knowledge? And the answer it gave was revolutionary. Knowledge, the Enlightenment argued, must be empirical. It must be testable, observable, verifiable through experience. This was the rise of empiricism, championed by thinkers like John Locke and Francis Bacon. And it gave birth to the scientific method, which is one of humanity's greatest achievements. But here's the shift. Aquinas said, some truths are known through reason reflecting on being itself. The Enlightenment said, truths are known through observation and experiment. Those are two completely different epistemologies, two different theories of knowledge. And once you adopt the Enlightenment standard, Aquinas' metaphysical arguments don't register as knowledge anymore. They register as speculation, as untestable philosophy, as, at best, interesting but unverifiable claims. The Enlightenment didn't prove Aquinas wrong. It changed the criteria for what proof means. And under the new rules, metaphysics was out of bounds.
Enter David Hume, Scottish philosopher, 18th century, skeptical to the core. Hume didn't attack God directly. He attacked the philosophical foundation that made arguments like Aquinas possible, and he did it with surgical precision. Hume's target, causation. Remember Aquinas' second way. Everything that is caused requires a cause. There must be an uncaused cause, Hume said. Wait, how do we know causation is real? We observe one event, then another. We see the billiard ball strike. We see the other ball move. We call that cause and effect, but what we actually observe is succession. Event A, then event B. We never observe causation itself. We only observe correlation, custom, habit, expectation. We assume the future will resemble the past, but we can't prove it. This is the problem of induction, and it devastates Aquinas' argument, not because Hume disproves God, but because he disarms metaphysics. If causation is just a mental habit, not a necessary feature of reality, then Aquinas' entire causal chain collapses, not because it's wrong, but because it's built on a concept we can't empirically justify. Hume didn't disprove God, he disarmed metaphysics. And once metaphysics is disarmed, Aquinas has no weapons left. But here's what most people miss. Hume's critique is devastating. If you accept his premises, if you believe that all knowledge must come from sense experience, if you believe that metaphysics must justify itself empirically, but what if those premises are wrong? What if there are questions that empiricism simply can't answer? What if Hume won the argument by refusing to play the game? That's the question nobody asks, because we've been so convinced that empiricism is the only valid form of knowledge. We don't even notice when it's dodging the hard questions. Questions like, why does the universe follow laws at all? Why is nature intelligible? Why is there something rather than nothing? Empiricism can describe what happens, but it can't explain why there's a what in the first place. And that's where the Enlightenment's mistake begins.
Here's the central argument of this video. The Enlightenment applied empirical criteria to metaphysical questions. And when metaphysics couldn't meet those criteria, the Enlightenment concluded that metaphysics was invalid. But that's a category error. It's like judging poetry by the standards of chemistry, or dismissing mathematics because it's not based on observation. Different domains of inquiry have different methods, different standards of evidence, different kinds of questions. Science asks, how does this work? Metaphysics asks, why is there this at all? Those are not the same question, and they don't require the same kind of answer. The Enlightenment was right about science. Empiricism works brilliantly for studying the natural world, for building technology, for testing hypotheses, for making predictions. But it was wrong about metaphysics, because metaphysics doesn't make empirical claims. It makes ontological claims, claims about the nature of being itself. And you can't observe being, you can only think about it. The Enlightenment didn't refute Aquinas. They changed the rules of the game, and then declared victory because Aquinas couldn't play by the new rules. But the questions Aquinas was asking didn't go away. They just stopped being considered legitimate. And that's the mistake. Because those questions about existence, causation, necessity, intelligibility are still with us, we just pretend we don't need to answer them anymore.
And then came Immanuel Kant, the philosopher who tried to save metaphysics and ended up burying it. Kant saw the problem. He saw that Hume's skepticism led to a dead end. If we can't trust causation, we can't trust science either. So Kant tried to rebuild the foundation. He made a distinction. Phenomena, the world as we experience it. Noumena, the world as it is in itself. We can know phenomena. We can study appearances, experiences, the structure of our perception. But we can never know noumena. We can never know things in themselves. And God, for Kant, is noumenal. God exists beyond the reach of theoretical reason. You can't prove God exists through logic or metaphysics, because God isn't part of the phenomenal world we can experience. Kant thought he was protecting God. He moved God out of the firing line of empirical critique. But here's what he actually did. Kant didn't kill God, he locked him outside reason. God became unknowable, unprovable, a postulate of practical reason, something we assume for moral purposes, but can never demonstrate. And once you do that, once you remove God from the domain of rational inquiry, something changes. God stops being a philosophical conclusion and becomes a psychological preference, a feeling, a personal conviction. But not knowledge. This is the point of no return. After Kant, you can believe in God. But you can't claim to know God through reason. The door Aquinas walked through is now sealed, and it's been sealed ever since. This is the moment philosophy stops asking why and starts pretending it doesn't matter. And here's what nobody saw coming. Once God is removed from the domain of reason, everything else starts to unravel. Because if God isn't a rational conclusion, then God becomes a hypothesis, a psychological projection, a cultural artifact. Feuerbach said it outright. God is the externalization of human nature. Marx called religion the opium of the people. Freud called it a neurosis, a comforting illusion we cling to because we can't face reality. This wasn't just atheism. This was reduction. God went from being the ground of being to being a coping mechanism, and morality. Morality lost its metaphysical foundation. For Aquinas, goodness wasn't subjective. It was grounded in the nature of being itself, in God as the source of all perfection. But once God is locked outside reason, morality becomes preference. Cultural convention, evolutionary adaptation. Useful, maybe, but not binding. Not objective, and religion. Religion became private, a matter of personal faith, not public truth. You can believe whatever you want in your heart, but don't expect it to have weight in rational discourse. Don't expect it to ground knowledge, ethics, or meaning. This is the world the Enlightenment created, not intentionally, but inevitably. Once you remove the metaphysical foundation, everything built on it becomes fragile, and the cracks are still spreading.
So let me be clear about something. The Enlightenment was right about science. Empiricism works. The scientific method is one of humanity's greatest tools. We should test hypotheses, gather evidence, observe nature, build models. None of that is wrong. But the Enlightenment was wrong about metaphysics, because it assumed that if something can't be verified empirically, it isn't knowledge. And that assumption is self-refuting. Because you can't empirically verify that claim itself. Only empirical claims are valid. That's not an empirical claim. It's a philosophical position, a metaphysical commitment. And the moment you make that commitment, you've already stepped outside the bounds of pure empiricism. Here's the deeper issue. Science presupposes things it cannot prove. It presupposes that nature is intelligible, that the universe follows consistent laws, that our minds can grasp those laws, that reason corresponds to reality. None of those things are empirical discoveries. They're metaphysical assumptions. Without them, science doesn't work. But science can't justify them. It just takes them for granted. Aquinas was asking, what grounds those assumptions? Why is nature intelligible? Why does causation hold? Why is there order instead of chaos? The Enlightenment didn't answer those questions. It just stopped asking them. And that's not intellectual progress. That's intellectual evasion. The Enlightenment won by refusing to acknowledge the questions it couldn't answer. And we've been living with that evasion ever since. And this brings us to Nietzsche, because Nietzsche understood what most Enlightenment thinkers didn't. He saw the consequences clearly. Once God is removed from reason, once metaphysics is dismissed, once morality loses its foundation, what's left? Nietzsche didn't invent the death of God. He announced it. He said out loud what philosophy had already done. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. But here's what people miss. Nietzsche wasn't celebrating. He was warning. He knew that removing God from the structure of knowledge and meaning would create a vacuum. And he knew that vacuum would be filled with nihilism, with the collapse of objective truth, with the will to power as the only remaining principle. The Enlightenment thought it could keep morality, meaning and reason, while discarding the metaphysical foundation. Nietzsche knew better. He saw that once you pull the foundation, the whole structure eventually falls. And he was right. We're still living in the rubble, still pretending we can have Enlightenment values without metaphysical grounding, still avoiding the question Aquinas asked, what holds it all together?
So here's the question we need to ask: not whether God exists, but whether modern reason is enough. Can empiricism alone give us meaning? Can science alone ground ethics? Can we build a coherent worldview on observation and experiment without any metaphysical foundation? The Enlightenment said yes. 3 centuries later, we're not so sure. We have more knowledge than ever before. More data, more technology, more scientific understanding, but less certainty about what any of it means. Less agreement on what's true, what's good, what's real. We can split atoms and sequence genomes, but we can't answer why there's something rather than nothing. We can map the brain, but we can't explain consciousness. We can describe natural selection, but we can't justify why truth matters or why we should care about it. These aren't scientific questions. They're metaphysical questions. The kind of questions Aquinas asked. The kind of questions the Enlightenment declared off limits. Maybe the Enlightenment didn't solve the problem of knowledge. Maybe it just narrowed the definition of knowledge so the problem would disappear. But the problem didn't disappear. It's still here, waiting. So here's what I want to know. Can empiricism alone sustain meaning, morality, and truth? Or are we living on borrowed metaphysical capital, values we inherited but can no longer justify? We didn't lose God. We lost the courage to ask metaphysical questions. Leave your answer in the comments. See you in the next one.